because this was a different type of talk for me, and because it's a talk that involves the word art, I'm going to organize it a little differently than I normally do. First, I'm not going to try and be accurate. And second, I'll skip around, starting out at the end. So the content of this talk is a list of ideas I find interesting that are tangentially related to the intersection between art and engineering. First, the ending. Here are two confluences. The image on the left represents the stately, socially appropriate mixing of erudite ideas from the world of engineering and art. The one on the right is not a confluence. It is a waterfall. I once stood at the confluence of two small but incredibly energetic rivers high in the Pyrenees in the early summer. The mountain was quite steep and the two rivers roared together in a chaotic tumult. I remember the feeling of standing on the boardwalk at the center of the great cascade of the rushing rivers, mixing and pummeling the rocks. The air was fresh and moist and smelled like after a forest rain. It was overwhelming. That is a great metaphor for what I think would be an exciting interaction between art and engineering. That's the feeling I'd like to have when I'm working with ideas. Hopefully this picture of a waterfall will help you to understand what I mean, even if it's not exactly the thing I'm thinking of. It might not have been the Pyrenees, and it might not have been midsummer. The boardwalk might have been a stony path. I'm not going for accuracy. The point is that I have this idea in my head that I want to share with you so that we can share an idea of what the future might be like. Perhaps the future that starts with the end of my talk. Now I'm going to go to the beginning of my talk. I had to look up what art was. I found a quote by Tolstoy. It's roughly this: to evoke a feeling, and having it evoked it in oneself, then by means of movement, lines and color, sounds or forms expressed in words, transmit that feeling to others. This is the activity of art. Art consists of this, that a person consciously, by means of certain external signs, transfers the feelings lived through so that others are infected by those feelings and also experience them. That seems clear enough. Art is a way to communicate the feelings that you've had. He also said that art can be expressed through everyday objects, which is an idea I really like, since engineers tend to be more involved in building stuff that doesn't look like art in the sense that it isn't designed for a museum or something. Still, I don't think Tolstoy is quite right about two things. One, he seems to think that art is communication. If so, the confusability of the signal, meaning the mathematical chance that the receiver gets a signal different from what the sender's intended, it seems pretty high. I've had the impression that artists don't like to communicate, commit to words what signals they intended to send. And two, he thinks of art as expressing emotion. A lot of art that I've experienced seems more interested in ideas than emotion. Of course, a famous researcher from Iowa, Antonio Damasio, showed us that the brain is a chemical soup of biological signals, emotions, and ideas that can't really be separated. Still, Tolstoy seems to beat the emotional drums pretty hard in his essay about art. So think about that for a minute and check your feelings. This is an artistically designed room. Are you feeling the emotions of the designer? How did you feel during your last trip to a museum? Was it a wheezy old mothballed experience? Or perhaps it was filled with catchy but not too trendy exhibits with carefully constructed interpretations of 30 words or less. Did you feel the emotions of the original creators, or were you interacting with their ideas? Mind you, I'm not authorized to provide any artistic answers here, I'm just asking questions. Music is close to my heart. When I go to a performance, a large part of me is critical, listening to intonation, harmonies, and rhythm. Structure, maybe, if I'm really trying. Often I'm impressed by the musician's technique. I'm not sure what the point of this intellectual exercise really is, but there I am, thinking critically. But sometimes there is a moment when I'm swept away, usually just briefly. I feel the groove completely. I don't think, I just feel. Then my brain takes over and ruins it. That's what keeps me going to music performances, but the moments are brief and there's a lot more being communicated than the awesome moment of emotional communication. Brains are really a problem sometimes. I think of art as more of an entertainment, a short trip that both amuses and alters you a little, like a hike in the Pyrenees that ends up helping you think about exchanging ideas. Probably an art professor could convince me that I'm wrong about this conception of art, so it's good that I'm not trying to be accurate. Moving on, I thought it was fair to consider the definition of engineering, so here's one created by the National Organization of Engineers. The creative application of scientific principles to design or develop structures, machines, apparatus, or manufacturing processes, or works utilizing them singly or in combination, or to construct or operate the same with full cognizance of their design, or to forecast their behavior under specific operating conditions, all as respects an intended function, economics, or operation, or safety to life and property. That's pretty dry. A lot of engineering comes off as pretty dry. Notice, though, that the second word is creative. Does it strike you as odd that something that is at its core creative is couched in such dry, stoic terms? I believe this is an age-old artifice. Like the artifice of old banks with classical columns and steel decoration on the windows. The stodginess is staged to convey the emotions of safety, predictability, and reliability. Investors bank millions, even billions, on the creativity of engineers. They want to feel like their investments are safe. In the back room of a bank, there are coffee rings on the pile of papers and a forgotten broken umbrella in the corner. Up front, it's all stately mahogany counters, impeccably manicured old men wearing vests, and a lot of green velvet. In engineering, the back room is filled with a bunch of young men and women feeling out of their depth, working hard, trying to think through all the angles, sweating the details they see and staying up late, worrying about the ones they don't. Perhaps the younger ones don't worry about the stuff they don't see. Maybe that pleasure is reserved for older guys like me. In the end, though, there are lots of risks being taken and a lot of double-checking and supporting friends and hoping that you thought of everything. Creativity is at the heart. The ratio, I believe, is given as 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. I'm no artist, but I suspect a similar formula applies. Moving on. It amuses me sometimes to think about cavemen. The brain has not changed very much in the time since cavemen were So rather than shouting ugh and beating their chest, it seems quite likely to me that cavemen were nagged by their wives and wondered whether they could count on the lazy guy to do his part at the woolly mammoth hunt next week. Probably they were wondering if there was a better way to lash the flint axe head onto the staff so that it wouldn't need to be redone so often. Apparently brain surgery was something they did as well, and in intercontinental trade. There's a lot of things we don't know because they didn't carve their ideas into stone. For them, engineering was arduous. You might have to travel for several years to reach the source of the right kind of flint to make a stone tool. There were trade routes, of course, but getting the stuff to experiment with new techniques would have been very slow. I don't think I could have the stamina for that kind of engineering. By Roman times, it was still pretty tough to be an engineer. There was lots of work, building bridges, aqueducts, boats, and other complicated things that had to be carefully thought out. I suspect there were lots of materials to work with in Rome, but as such, but even given that, things were not easy. Take Roman numerals, for example. The algorithm to do long division with Roman numerals required 2 years of study. The problem is that there's no number 0 in Roman numerals. That came later from the Arab masters. You might think that early universities were set up just to teach things like how to do division with Roman numerals in order to build aqueducts. That's not the case. Early European universities were devised to train lords, following the ideas of well-rounded education espoused by Aristotle, who was very interested in things like truth, beauty, and goodness. He believed in a well-rounded education, including literature, sciences, and the arts. Our teaching traditions came from this beginning in ancient Greece. Universities were established in Cambridge, Paris, Oxford, and Bologna around 1000 AD and spread from there, emphasizing things like rhetoric, geometry, and astrology. During this time, engineering followed the apprentice model, as did, I believe, the fine arts of sculpting, painting, and music. West Point was founded as a school specifically to train military engineers around 1800s, around the turn of the century, following a French model of the École Polytechnique from around the same time. The land-grant institutions, like Iowa State, were founded partly to provide more engineers, farmers, and soldiers to the expanding frontier. This was the first time that engineering was brought into the university within the United States. The marriage has not been without its challenges. Here at the University of Iowa, the early engineering program was dominated by practical education relating to things like drafting and metalwork. My lab, currently right across the street here, is currently in the old foundry of the building labeled mechanical engineering. I have a picture in here that we can pass around of engineering students working in the foundry at Penn State. You can see from that picture that making stuff, kind of dirty stuff, wearing an apron was a big part of engineering way back in the day. Around World War II, physics changed the delicate balance between the science and the arts of which engineering was a member. In the 1960s, science, scientific philosophy, and science culture overran the practical arts, who were relegated to a second-class standing within the power structure of the university and funding agencies. Engineering responded by adopting a more scientific bent, becoming an applied science, and focusing on the corners of science where the clean elegance of simple equations became replaced by messy approximations and empirical methods. The practical arts of engineering became focused on student projects directed by industry people. In the 60s, the industry supervisors were trained in the old methods and served well as crotchety, demanding masters for the young pups filled with theoretical knowledge. Now the masters were themselves trained with theory rather than practice. Perhaps this is too much history, but I wanted to make the point that engineering now looks quite a bit different from art. Our students do math, they write computer programs, they take hard classes, and have manicured fingernails. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when engineering students wore aprons and behaved a lot like the way I imagine sculpturing students behave. Also, I want to point out that it may be that the engineering world has drifted down the wrong course. I often hear complaints from students about the lack of practical skills they acquired during their training. Since I work on practical projects in my lab, I'm often confronted by mechanical engineering students who are not particularly good mechanical designers, and electrical engineers who don't know how to design or debug a practical circuit. When I mention such things to other faculty members, I'm usually told that the students are great designers and I'm being too hard on them. However, I've taught middle school students to debug circuits, and I know that 80 years ago, Boy's Life, the magazine, had articles about how to build your own crystal radio, so I find the arguments of my peers unconvincing. If I find a student with practical skills, it's usually because they have taught themselves these skills or they've picked them up from a job or a relative. I think artists have maintained the tradition of teaching students how to build things. I suspect that they chose this route because it was more difficult for them to get on the physics bandwagon in the 60s. But here we are, coming up to the crossroads, and artists hold critical knowledge that the engineers will need. Ultimately, though, a big chunk of the industrial world still regularly comes to the engineering school for workers. Lately, they've wanted creativity and innovation. And this is another area where engineering and the arts can collaborate. Let me explain how I think creativity works. Long-term memory is a network of encoded memories linked together by ties to other ideas. I've heard that everything that happens to us is stored. We just lose the ties between the ideas. Repeated access to an idea reinforces the connection between the ties and ultimately makes the ideas more accessible. Having lots of different experiences makes an idea, lots of different experiences with an idea makes it easier to access the idea through different paths. Repetition makes individual paths stronger. Creativity, then, has to do with moving through your network of stored ideas to reach places or make connections that others do not immediately see. A good way to do this is to have a network that's filled with rich and interesting things, such as reading good books. A lot of interesting people that I know read encyclopedias when they were kids. I know I did. I still get distracted reading seemingly irrelevant wiki pages and signing up to do things like this talk that, from a Machiavellian perspective, has very little to do with getting my professional task list accomplished. My suboptimal intellectual paths, however, have rewarded me with big words and allusions to Machiavelli and a rough understanding of the history of education. These things are fodder upon which I can draw to connect ideas. If you don't happen to share my idiomatic idea network, the connections that I make might seem rather random and hopefully interesting and creative. Perhaps this is part of Aristotle's motivation for a well-rounded education. Here I could talk about the fact that engineering students typically choose from 5 elective courses, and most industrial engineering students' curriculum differ by about 3 courses, and that makes their education particularly fragile. But I will resist this digression in order to indulge in another, the joy to be found in a beautiful lie. When talking about lies, it's important to distinguish lies from bullshit. There's a great treatise I read called On Bullshit by a philosopher named Henry Frankfurt. I think they should give a copy to every freshman. Frankfurt explains that bullshit is a complete disregard for the truth and basically undermines the importance of truth. Think about a car salesman that is only worried about making a sale without being concerned about whether the car works or if the car is likely to be a good fit for the customer's needs. In that situation, the salesman is likely to say things only in an effort to please the listener with a complete disregard for the truth. The truth is irrelevant. Bullshitting demeans and undermines truth and is abhorrent to people who seek to understand the world. A good lie, however, circles the truth like an adversary. It is carefully constructed. It fences with truth. Think of Kurt Vonnegut and Mark Twain. They write beautiful lies, stocked with ideas and perspectives. Their stories are not true. They are beautiful lies you can learn from. They are lies of merit. Recall that an idea network connects things together. Ideas don't have to be true to enhance creativity. They only have to be useful connectors. Beautiful lies decorate the cultivated garden of your mind. They offer color, texture, and context to the solid foundations of math and physics. They pass boundaries of what is to what might be. My mind is spiced with people who have become unstuck in time, melodramatic spaceship captains obsessed with the difference between humans and aliens, the improbability drive, stairs that go up and simultaneously have waterfalls flowing down, and 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. We need the things that are not. They enrich and augment us. Our idea network should be as richly filled with the not yet realized as they are with the things that are, because engineers plan and live in a world of what may be or will be rather than the world of what is. Let me create and define 3 types of useful lies: false causation, the leap, and a false photograph. With a false causation, the liar says, with purely speculative support, that A causes B. For example, here's a slide that shows the nearly linear relationship between the number of pirates and global temperatures. The horizontal axis is the estimated number of pirates in the world, ranging from 35,000 on the left to 17 on the right. On the vertical axis is the global temperature. The dots on the graph are for various points of time in history, going from 1820, when it was cooler and there were many pirates, to 2000, when it was warmer and there were fewer pirates. It shows that A is related to B. From this data, we are asked to conclude that becoming a pirate will help to fight the greenhouse effect. That is to say, it claims that A, the number of pirates, causes B, global warming. Naturally, this leads the reasonable person to wonder if it might be true, why it might not be true, and whether or not we should stop A in order to stop B, or do more of A to get more of B. A connection is made where none has been made before. Now, the reasonable person is thinking more about their world because of the lie's stimulation. Of course, this is a dangerous tool, and such logical fallacies should be called out whenever they are unintentional. But like a sharp knife, their threat can add to their usefulness. Freakonomics has been successful for this reason, but a careful thinker must stay wary of actually believing such things. The second type of lie is the leap. A liar makes an unsupported conjecture. Logically, it goes like this. If A, then B, where A, B, and their relationship are neither well known nor clearly defined. The important thing is that B is presumably some future that we haven't experienced yet. For example, Einstein said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." The very statement of the conjecture introduces questions such as, what else would happen if B is true? Would we like B? Should we fight against movement toward B? Does A really lead to B? What should stop it? Again, the stimulation there, with the stimulation, there is opportunity to form new connections that may later lead to insights that we would call creative. The third type of lie is the false photograph. For example, Vonnegut suggested that the pinnacle of evolution for humans will be walrus-like creatures that lie on the beach and laugh at each other's farts. This type of lie creates tangible images against which we can explore and test our imagination. The key to developing new things, the key to an engineer's creativity, is to hold a clear mental image about what it is that you wish to accomplish. The more solid the image is, the easier it is to conduct the mental calculations involved in making it real. In designing something real, every aspect will be tested, weighed, contrasted against competing approaches and possibilities. The lazy human mind will take the easy path unless the more desirable one is clear and necessary. The result is a net watering down of vague ideas, a death by 1,000 cuts that makes the final product a shredded caricature of the original vision. A good liar can augment the mind with a shadow box of painted porcelain lies that the inventor can grab onto and play with. A good liar and a good engineer can change the world. Many of the most successful engineers I know are also good liars. A good lie, however, is not bullshit. It's important to know that a good lie is only a little impossible. A lie of merit respects the truth. It toys with the truth. It bends the truth enough to whet the appetite that is something other than truth. Really, a little impossible is just the thing to help the engineer cut their teeth. A little impossible is what separated Kennedy from the moon. Maybe a little impossible is all that separates us from dealing with our dirty environment or our chronic poverty and war. So far, I've basically said that artists can be useful to engineers because artists are liars and liars generate ideas. And now I'll explain how engineers might be useful to artists. Engineers can help to provide a fulfilling intellectual environment with important opportunities to challenge existing paradigms and change lives. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure how engineers can be useful to artists, because artists are such a diverse crowd and they have so many different competing needs and aspirations. I suspect that, at least for some, the resources and opportunities that come with working with important problems facing society would be a benefit. However, we need to recognize that the earlier barriers to entry that limited an artist's ability to build things have been largely removed. Rapid prototyping has made the world of manufacturing much easier to enter. The internet makes it easy to get access to materials and supplies that previously would have required insider knowledge. Technical information is easier to get, and people are connected in a way that allows them to share technical information more easily. Long gone are the secret handshakes to gain access to the guild hall to learn the sacred arts of the trade. Now it just takes persistence, guts, and hard work. There is a big opportunity, of course, and that's the growing challenge for our next century. It's my belief that without the barriers, creativity and design will rise to prominence as people seek self-expression to achieve higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think the era of gaining social approval for wearing a Nike shirt is heading for the trash pile of culture where it belongs, and that self-expression is worth more than a demonstration of financial prowess demonstrated by the control of mass-marketed trinkets. It may be that engineers and artists will need to collaborate in this new world of design. It may be that artists will fare well without the help of engineers. We may discover a world in which backyard design goes viral and fortunes are made independent of origin. However, it's likely that the big money and the big projects will continue to be directed toward the people with credentials. If artists want to go big on big projects, teaming up is the safer bet. Moving on, when I wrote a short description of this talk, I imagined that I would explain the process by which engineers design things, provide some examples and challenges and opportunities. I don't even remember the guy who wrote those words. It was so long ago. Still, in the event that you came here to hear the advertised talk, or in case you're an artist and wonder how all this works, I thought I'd explain a little bit. There are, of course, 1,000 different ways, 1,000 variations on the theme about how engineers design, but here's a pretty standard example from NASA. The details of the process are not as important as the fact that it is a process. That's what engineers are taught to do, to work within a structure. Deadlines and budgets are a critical part of the process. The best engineers know how to dance in a bit of creativity and jazz things up while they are simultaneously and ruthlessly cutting away waste and inefficiency. When big money is involved, and you can be sure, when big money is involved, you can be sure that the dancing and cutting involves people's careers, reputations, and entire companies. So I'm saying that in some circles, it is straight out warfare and bloodshed. Very exciting, I'm sure. But I personally did not choose that path. In my world, the game is played by coming up with ideas that seem fundable and responsive to the demands of various federal agencies, and writing 15 to 20-page dense project descriptions for sums of money between $100,000 and $5 million. The trick is to define an area that is simultaneously exciting and edgy, but also realistic. Once the money comes, which, by the way, has a probability of only 5 to 15%, in the current research climate, when the money comes, we do the work, or something like it, and write research articles. In this game, it is important to have ideas that push the boundaries of technology, but not so much that people don't believe it can be done. Then you need to motivate students to do the work, or your colleagues, or yourself. I've noticed that this last option doesn't seem to be very popular. Sometimes people become passionate about their piece of a project, even though it's taking too long or taking too much money and it doesn't seem to be doing any good. Then someone has to have a hard talk. Other times someone is doing such good work so quickly that other projects are spinning off and getting their own funding. This is a good thing and puts everyone in a generally positive mood and really helps the career of the person who is having the good ideas. I've worked with a few artists who didn't understand or maybe didn't accept the constraints under which we were working, but more often they just found them tiring. That's understandable. I find the constraints tiring also, but honestly, the challenge of doing real things gets me excited. Once the money lands, it's a race to see if you're smart enough to overcome all the twists that nature throws at you before you run out of time and money. I love that race. It gives me sort of a runner's high. As for projects, the National Academy of Sciences developed a list of grand challenges for engineers, which it updates regularly. Currently, the list includes things like make solar energy economical, provide access to clean water, advance health informatics, and advance personalized learning. Most engineering projects have much shorter term goals than these, but I can say that many engineering researchers here on campus are working on projects like these and could use some help. To give you an idea for projects, a few that I've had over the year include a computer interface to visualize a robot searching for meteorites in the Antarctic. We landed $1 million over 6 years to help science do geology with a robot going through the Atacama Desert in Chile. Some friends from Carnegie Mellon got $5 million to build the robot for that, and we just focused on the scientists as sort of practice for Mars missions. Another project involved putting a robot in the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, which was a fun trip. These days, my lab works mostly on medical simulators to train orthopedic surgeons using virtual reality technology. We've also done some wireless device projects to monitor activities in the hospital. Some of these projects were funded with grants of $5,000, others in the range of $750,000. I work on one project which I didn't write that was awarded $5 million. My time is divided among these. I fund my graduate and undergraduate students with the budget, which are generally split among multiple researchers who collaborate on the project. Each engineering professor has their own set of collaborations and funding agencies, kind of like a small business. Of course, an artist who wants to get involved can't reasonably expect to just step in and take the wheel. There are big games afoot with strategies that will play out over years and decades. However, creativity and product production values have a surprisingly large effect. It's standard practice, for example, for robot researchers to produce what we laughingly refer to as glamour shots of their robots, with nice lighting and so forth, to catch the eye of potential reviewers. Video, publicity, and public outreach are also areas where researchers often know they should be putting more attention, but they're often pressed by conflicting needs to focus on writing papers and more proposals. I think those aspects of large projects are a natural opportunity for artists. Once in the door, it's important to show that you're not only capable of generating sexy technology pictures and positive PR, but that your ideas can fundamentally contribute to the creative direction of the project. That probably means understanding and embracing the science and technology behind the project. I think that's where some artists often falter. Reading the papers and proposals is a good source for what's going on, but it's likely that the ideas will be complex and difficult to understand. These works are written for other scientists, not for the general public, so some translation will be required. Fortunately, most scientists are happy to translate a few paragraphs if you can express where you got lost. Frankly, it helps me to walk through my work like this, particularly if someone is interested. Once you've got the real gist of what's happening, you are free to play. I think the rule is one idea per meeting for newbies, and some of these ideas are likely to fly like a lead balloon. It only takes a couple good ideas, though, to earn everyone's ear, assuming you've landed on a good team. Of course, you'd have to continue to learn about the science and engineering technology to play the game, but I honestly believe that it is such a good game, and that most intelligent people, once they make it past the entry barriers of language and math, find the science to be very interesting and an exciting game. There is much more creativity and dreaming going on than one would garner from public culture. The practitioners are often intelligent and curious, and the lifestyle is generally hardworking but open-minded and playful, although you'll find that this can vary dramatically between the labs. So, to summarize, So this type of confluence between artists and engineers would be great because maybe I saw it in the Pyrenees one summer. Tolstoy was wrong about art. Art is about both ideas and emotion, since the two are not really separable. He was right in that even things like carefully crafted sound of a Harley-Davidson engine and your computer mouse can be art. Engineering is way more creative than you thought, just has a bank-like exterior. Historically, engineering was taught through an apprenticeship-like model, and it only started to look like physics recently. It may have settled back into looking more like sculpture. To put this in perspective, since engineering is a field roughly 4,000 years old, and only the last 50 have been taught the current way, that's about the same ratio as the last sentence I just read compared to my whole talk. I'm hoping that artists can help us bring back to where we belong, making things. I explained how creativity worked and called artists a bunch of liars who can be very useful in connecting ideas and helping us visualize things that are not here yet. Finally, I laid out a practical way that artists might get involved with engineers. If you are an artist, then your next step is to start dreaming up your beautiful lies and trying to learn more about how we might save the world. If you are an engineer, then your next step is to buy an artist a lunch, listen to beautiful lies, try to identify the small impossible thing, and maybe make that impossible thing possible. And then a small miracle occurs. In step 4, we will try to save the world. In my next talk, I'll try to focus a bit more on step 3. Thank you very much. Well, first we have to establish a safe rapport between the two groups, which probably means drawing the engineers out of their shells a little bit, because my experience has been that usually the engineers are very task-driven, you know, like check the box, check the box, check the box. So like there's not many engineers who are going to come to this talk. So we'd have to draw them out. There are some friendly ears there. We'd have to identify them and then tempt them with some benefit. I think the people who are most likely to be tempted are the ones who are basically creative. There's a surprising number of engineers who are artists in their spare time. You know, amateur musicians, visual artists. I mean, just in my hallway, about 50% of the people in my hallway have some hobby that's artistic. So they like that, but they think of it as a spare time thing. Maybe one way to do it would be to organize a group around proposals, large money proposals, and see if we couldn't get the right artists and the right engineers together to write an edgy proposal that would draw in money. And I think that they would come in. And I think they would find working with artists to be neater than their regular collaborations. Like they would go out of their way because they think that it would be cool. Yeah. I don't know, I mean, to be cynical for just a moment, it may be that the art school creates barriers to the upper level studio classes to maintain student-faculty ratios that are appropriate for studio classes. I don't know that the same dynamic's true in computer science, but I know that student-faculty ratios and the expense of running labs is a pretty important concern within engineering. So I don't know that, like if I analyzed what it takes to get somebody to program virtual reality, I don't know that that's really a 2-year sequence when you could just send somebody to, you know, the software camp to learn Maya or whatever, and they'd accept somebody who didn't have a PhD in computer science into their school. So I think that some of that might be something we've created because of financial issues that we should address, you know, that need to be addressed. In my classes, I've been experimenting, and I didn't talk about that a lot here, but a couple of my graduate students are here. And so one of the things that I've done is to decrease the number of lectures to almost 0, and replace them with short one-on-one meetings and more student-to-student interaction. And there's this other trend in education called flipping the classroom, where you have the students read the didactic material outside of class and then spend the time in class interacting, which seems to me to be much more rational and also a much easier way to save the university that is basically a real estate investment. If everything goes towards online videos, I'm not sure why the University of Iowa will be necessary in 100 or 150 years. However, if education's designed as interaction between individuals who are physically close or working with their hands on something, then you must own the real estate to do that. And you have to have people come to you. Whereas the current model, I think, is where we lecture. Well, I don't get it. I don't understand why that makes sense and why we would want to propagate that. So I like the idea of students working with students and professors working directly with students in a way that would require the student to be physically present, because that's our whole model. And that's why we exist, is to have the students here with us. We change that, and I mean, the number of other things that I see falling out, it's a little shocking, really, if you believe that everyone could just learn on the internet. You wonder what's going to happen here.